Okay, we are going to be discussing Žižek's pandemic. So the way that we kind of broke this up is in main ideas. So one of the first points is what caused the pandemic. Um, According to Žižek, he stated that the usual suspects are waiting in line to be questioned: globalization, the capitalist market, and the transience of the rich. So I think that another thing that kind of comes into this is political leaders and the task force that was created to handle the pandemic. So yeah, what do you guys think about what caused this global pandemic?
I'd say that there's definitely a certain aspect of the politicization of the virus itself that had to do with like its increased spread. Obviously, the cause of it is a virus. It's the mutation and everything like that biologists will talk about. But I think that what Zizek is getting at more here is kind of the societal constructs that allowed it to spread. And I think my one issue I have here with Zizek is that I think um, he doesn't quite address how the politicization of it kind of impacted it. Um, I think one thing to keep in mind is that like there was actually a lot of response, not just in the United States, but throughout the world that was prevented somewhat by political scrutiny. So you saw like and I know that uh, there's definitely a lot of things that could have been done a lot differently with the United States handling of the virus. I think there were a lot of different policy changes that could have at least gotten us back to normal faster or just completely stopped it altogether. But all that aside, the Trump administration pretty early in the virus starting, like it stopped travel to China. Um, and the media and and Congress and everything called him a xenophobic idiot, saying uh, you're just doing this to further the trade war. Um, you don't like immigrants, that kind of a thing. But then, quite literally, 20 days later, he stops travel to Europe, and they say, "Why didn't you do it sooner?" That kind of a thing. And so, and I'm not with it, and I'm not meaning to condone the treatment of the virus. I think there was a lot of inadequacies in it, but it is important to note that like it could have there is a role that was played by the fact that no matter what current administration did, they would have been criticized for it, kind of a thing.
Mhm.
um and then the next sort of pillar supposition that Zizek makes is that we have this virus. It was spread by capitalist Western ideals, um, and that the only solution to it is going to be communism. The one of the titles of his chapters is "Communism or Barbarism," as simple as that. Um, and the question we're asking here is it really that simple? Um, and it's kind of a complex issue to bring up in the short time we have here, because it's definitely a bold claim. It says essentially that in the given the current situation with the coronavirus and all of that, that a that communist seizure of the means of production, where um, we will take workers and everything, and we will eliminate market mechanisms that would usually govern what they would do to make money, and instead we would like direct current usage of capital in order to make masks, ventilators, what have you. um, and he suggests that save this communist alternative, we would have barbarism, literally a like Mad Max style. He actually says like a Mad Max style, um, combat, this just chaos, ruled by by essentially warlords and things of this nature, that it would literally be a post-apocalypse in the absence of a communist kind of world order that would govern it. And I was wondering what you guys might think on that, because it is a pretty incendiary claim as they go.
I personally think a simpler kind of way to look at this is at the beginning of this with that barbaric aspect, how toilet paper was like completely ripped off of all the shelves. People went absolutely wild. Kind of having that communist ideal of like distribution of resources and coordination in production. It makes sense like to avoid just utter chaos among the public.
I will say that with respect to wars and communism, um, communist countries have not been exempt from war. So I think using war as his example of barbarism in that case is a little bit of a misnomer if you're going to say communism wouldn't have that kind of barbarism.
Sorry, I didn't say so before, but that was the quote here that I was looking at. Žižek on page 103 says, "If states simply isolate, wars will explode. These sorts of developments are what I'm referring to when I talk about communism, and I see no alternative to it except barbarism." I think what he's actually saying here is that in the absence of communism, there will be war, kind of a thing. But I know what you're saying. And I think he's more his idea isn't just. I think Grace, that's an excellent point, that the uh, that distribution of resources is a big thing he's talking about, but I think also it's just sort of this, for lack of being overly vague, it's just kind of this general uh, feeling of authoritarianism. I think that he believes the main failure of Western civilization, when hit with large scale tragedies, or disasters like the pandemic, is that we're not decisive enough. Democracy in and of itself kind of lends itself to be, people will always disagree, and democracy encourages that. Whereas, his kind of communist idea would sort of have the government be able to streamline everything so that it could act a lot quicker. And I think I don't disagree that that is somewhat valid, but I think a lot of freedom would be sacrificed in that sort of ideal.
So on page 93 of his book, Žižek mentions the saying, "In a crisis, we are all socialists." And I wanted to take a look at some questions having to do with that statement, because he's not exactly clear on what would constitute a crisis. Obviously, COVID-19 is a societal crisis, but for a rich person who has great doctors and is well insulated like Jeff Bezos, it's not really very much of a personal crisis. And during this time, he's made billions of dollars. So that's very capitalist of him, I would think. And I wonder if most people are fundamentally different from Jeff Bezos. If they had the same opportunities that Jeff Bezos had, would they take the same actions as him? Would they keep making money, or would they suddenly become very socialist? So what I kind of landed on with regards to that statement is that people are more socialist when they're having a personal crisis or when they need help with something. And I wanted to know if you guys thought that someone could be an opportunist and a socialist at the same time.
Looking at the current pandemic, I would say that we're socialists in the sense, like how Grace mentioned, we're distributing supplies to people who need it. Some nations have universal health care so that people can receive the testing that they need or the treatment that they need. But also at the same time, we do live in a capitalist world. So I would not say that we're fully socialist at this time. Capitalism still needs to survive. People still want to make money. So with looking at that, the market's not going to shut down completely. So people like Jeff Bezos will continue to make money, especially since more people are at home right now. So they don't have as much to do. So they're online buying stuff. So that's just constantly adding to his stock in Amazon.
I think it all just really goes to show how skewed we are. And like, a capitalist economy in society when situations like COVID-19 happen.
Yeah, I'd certainly say that's true. I think this kind of with Western society, it did sort of it kind of does open itself up to have situations like this where people who are in the right, kind of market setup really benefit from, what would actually be termed as a disaster for most people. But frankly, I think that, that's kind of proof of concept. If Jeff Bezos is doing so well, isn't that proof enough that, it's he's deserving of the money he's getting? And, Zizek's argument then would be that, it's only on the backs of so many people that aren't doing so well that he's doing well. And I think certainly a reasonable take to have. We are a little low on time here, so let's keep moving on here, Tim.
All right, so the next main part of Zizek's argument is we're all in the same boat. So as we all know, the pandemic has affected everyone in some way. Whole nations have been shut down for months. Over 1 million people have died from COVID-19, and life has simply not been normal. As Zizek points out, we're all in the same boat when it comes to COVID-19. Although some nations have done much better handling the virus than others, everyone has to deal with its negative impact. Personally, I've come to know quarantine very well. This past quarter, my floor of Muir Hall has been in quarantine for about 7.5 weeks. Even though I've not been able to have a true introduction to college, it is more important that we keep the campus community safe. And I believe Zizek would argue that in general, people need to quarantine when they're around someone sick because we need to keep the whole world safe. And Connor, I heard you would like to talk about how the pandemic has affected you.
Well, the pandemic came at a pretty personally inconvenient time for me, I would say. I was just graduating from Allen Hancock College in Lompoc to transfer to Cal Poly. So my graduation was delayed and social distanced. And obviously, the university experience is a little bit diminished by all this online school stuff. And I've known people that have had the virus too. So it definitely is affecting everyone's lives. A lot of the places I would hang out around town have been shut down for months. Some are just opening, but Gavin Newsom announced earlier today that there's going to be 10 p.m. curfews. So some of those places are going to be shutting back down again. I understand that, especially because of the long-term health consequences of the virus that have been appearing, that people do need to be careful. But it is a shame that, all the students going through this at this time, in all different grades too, having to miss out on those social experiences and those milestones.
So after all of this, the big question that Žižek poses is, will we return to normal? And he thinks not. He thinks that there's no return to normal after all of this immense suffering. And that can come in all sorts of different ways: social change, economic change, political change. So I guess it's sort of just, pretty broad yes or no question, but do you guys think that we'll return to normal or there will be a major societal shift?
Frankly, I do think we'll return at least to a semblance of normal. I think that social distancing is here to stay for some time. I think we're going to be seeing echoes of this virus for probably a decade, if not more than that. I think that there will be a lot of policy changes, and just because I think that the virus highlighted a lot of vacancies in, federal systems. We were unprepared. We just didn't, and I'm not saying that that's a purely American sentiment. I think there were a lot of countries in the world that just weren't quite expecting the virus, obviously. So I think that I think that there is, however, a kind of normal that we'll get back to. I think that the world will naturally begin to recover. We've already seen that a vaccine is being synthesized, and I would say within a year tops, that'll be pretty widely distributed. And I think that there's a lot of at least those elements that will return to normal.
I do think we will return to some sort of normalcy, but overall, societally, there will be some differences. Like when people are sick, they'll probably wear a mask, so that way they can't spread their sickness. And I would also say something as simple as the handshake may kind of go away, or at least it won't be as common because people don't want to spread a virus or disease to someone else.
That
So
kills
hopefully,
me. I loved the
hopefully
firm
not.
handshake. That was my favorite.
Sweet. Well, that's our take on Žižek. Thanks for watching.